Raids. To most console and non-MMO players, a pretty foreign concept. What are raids? What is raiding? What will raiding be like in Destiny? This video will explore the art of raiding and the possibilities of how Destiny will choose to handle raids. We'll go over MMO raiding and how it could compare to an FPS like Destiny as well. We'll talk about games with no class roles and how they compare to games with class roles. If you've never played an MMO, or never been in a raid and you're interested in getting the best loot Destiny will offer and doing the most difficult content in the game, keep watching. I must note that this video is very speculative. We don't know any information about Destiny's raids right now, but the aim of this video is to talk about the concept of raiding and what it could be like in Destiny. I am most versed in World of Warcraft, the most popular MMO currently on the market. World of Warcraft has some very memorable raids, but we'll start with the core concept of a raid. So what is a raid? A raid is a high-level dungeon with difficult encounters that requires a certain number of people to complete. In Destiny, this number will be 6. The difference between a strike and a raid is that a strike is designed to be completed in around 20 to 30 minutes, has a 3-player maximum, and is much easier. Most MMOs feature the holy trinity of group composition, which consists of tanks, healers, and damage dealers. A tank is someone who holds the attention of enemies and bosses, this attention being called aggro, and has very high defensive capabilities. To have an enemy aggro you, you need to generate threat, which is mainly done by dealing damage. Tanks typically have modifiers on their abilities that make them generate additional threat because they don't deal as much damage as damage dealers. The goal of the tank is to make sure they hold the attention of the enemies 100% of the time and or move the enemies into a better position when needed. A healer is pretty obvious. They heal. Their goal is to make sure that nobody dies. It's pretty self-explanatory. Damage dealers, often called DPS, meaning damage per second, provide the damage. They kill things. They also generate threat, which they need to monitor as to not pull aggro and die. Everyone needs each other in this trinity. No tanks and everyone takes too much damage. No healers and everyone dies. No DPS and enemies will slowly tear your group apart. How many you bring of each role is dependent on how many people you're allowed to bring into the raid and what kind of encounter you are up against, so it varies per fight. Before we continue, as a disclaimer, Destiny is not an MMO. I must also note that Destiny does not abide by the Holy Trinity. There are technically no roles. No one specifically is a tank, DPS, or healer. The Titan is not specifically a tank, but does have defensive capabilities via their focus. The Hunter is not specifically a DPS, but does have offensive capabilities via their focus. The Warlock is not specifically a healer, but does have support-based capabilities via their focus. Everyone will be shooting guns at enemy faces. But I do think that players will eventually settle into the tank heal DPS archetypes within Destiny. The roles might not be explicitly defined, but as more people realize what each class is capable of, the more I think we'll see this holy trinity form. However, the objective of this video is to describe the duties required of players besides their respective role in order to succeed. Raid bosses are like giant puzzles that you need to put together through a combination of teamwork and an understanding of mechanics. Typically, a boss fight isn't just everyone sitting in front of the boss and doing what they're supposed to be doing. You need to perform your role in terms of tanking, healing, or DPS, but also handling the mechanics of any boss fight and doing what the raid requires of you during a fight to make sure you can handle any objectives that may happen during the fight. The best way I could describe a raid encounter is to just show you an example of a raid boss and go over everything that everyone would need to know in order to perform to the best of their abilities. Every single encounter is different. No bosses ever do the same exact thing except want to kill you. The best guilds and clans in the world have members that memorize every single boss encounter, not only for their role, but for everyone's role as well. We're going to go over my favorite boss encounter ever. What I'm about to go over is a simplified version of how I plan to cover raid bosses in Destiny, provided that they are complicated enough to require individual videos, so this will give you a little taste of what to expect from me in the future. Keep in mind that this raid is designed for 25 people, not 6 like we'll see in Destiny. So, allow me to introduce Lady Vashj. Lady Vosh is a fight that has 3 phases. Phase 1 lasts until you get Lady Vosh to 70% HP. She has several abilities in the first phase. She has her basic melee attack, which needs to be tanked. She has a multi-shot ability, which is a ranged attack that deals damage to a target and also to the 4 closest people to that target. She has a shock attack, which deals high damage to her current target and stuns them for a short time, which will be the tank. She has the ability to immobilize everyone in a 15-yard radius of her, which also deals moderate damage for a short time. Finally, she has a lightning attack which deals damage to a target periodically and to all other people within 15 yards of that target. Got all that? The first phase is pretty simple and is referred to as a tank and spank. Tank and spank is a term used for a boss or phase of a boss where all players just need to perform their raid role: tank, heal, and DPS. There are typically no other things that are required of you. You'll also have to deal with her mechanics, but in this first phase, they're not a big deal. How you deal with those mechanics depends on what classes you have in your raid. Phase 2 starts when you get her health to 70%. At this point, she becomes immune to all damage and 4 generators appear. You need to disable these 4 generators. Every time you disable one, she loses 5% of her health, and when all 4 are disabled, the next phase starts. The raid now needs to split up into teams, which have hopefully been discussed before the fight has started. There are typically 4 to 5 teams that are formed. Each team goes to a point on the map, north, south, east, and west. Each of these teams has a goal: get the tainted core to the generator. The tainted core is an item that drops from an enemy called the tainted elemental, which spawns only every 50 seconds and spawns randomly on the map. The tainted elemental will also disappear if not killed fast enough. The tainted core needs to be thrown from person to person so it can disable a generator, because having this core immobilizes you. You can't move. During all of this, water elemental enemies will spawn from the 4 compass locations that need to be killed. They only need about 1 to 2 people on them in order to kill them quickly. They do not have aggro, meaning if you attack it, it will just ignore you. The water elemental's goal is to get to the boss, and that is all they will do. If they reach the boss, her damage increases. If too many elementals reach the boss, she'll deal too much damage, and you'll all die. During all of that, 2 other enemies spawn throughout the fight. One is a melee enemy, the other is a ranged enemy. The melee enemy needs to be tanked and killed by everyone. The ranged enemy needs to be kited around the room in a circle and killed by ranged DPS in the form of ranged spells and dots, or damage over time spells, because the enemy has a perpetual aura around itself that will fear players. Fear is a debuff that makes you lose control of your character for a short time. During all of that, the boss will periodically do a lightning cone attack, filling 1/8 of the room, which you need to avoid or you will die. Got all that? So let's recap. Kill water elementals, kill tainted elementals to get the core, throw the core to the generators, kill melee and caster enemies, don't get hit by the lightning attack, and don't die because the group only gets a limited amount of times they can resurrect people during the fight. Phase 3 starts when all generators have been disabled. The boss's health will be at 50%. Ideally, all other enemies from Phase 2 will have been killed before the final generator is disabled. Otherwise, they will carry into the next phase, and that's bad. Phase 3 is a burn phase. A burn phase is a point in the fight where you need to deal as much damage as humanly possible to the boss, either to kill it outright or to get it to another phase. Phase 3 is a lot like Phase 1. She has all the same abilities, except now, in the sky are spore bats. Spore bats spit poison on the ground, which leaves a patch which damages you if you stand in it. As the fight goes on, more and more bats will spawn, and the floor will turn green with poison. You have to move the boss around to avoid the poison on the ground, while simultaneously dealing with all the abilities the boss has from Phase 1. After about 3 to 4 minutes, you'll be overrun by poison, will die, and will have to do the entire encounter over again. This fight can last up to 15 minutes. By today's standards, that's considered slightly above average in terms of duration. So, did you memorize all of that? I hope so, because that's what would be expected of you and everyone in the group. Now granted, not all fights are this complex, or as long. This fight is all about keeping everything in control. a management fight. Once your team is familiar with the fight, none of these mechanics are particularly difficult, they become second nature. It's all about how your team manages itself under all these conditions. Let's go over a fight which is a lot easier to understand. Groll the Dragon Killer. Groll is this big old dude right here, and he gets bigger. Every 30 seconds, his damage increases by 15%. This effect stacks, meaning after a minute, his damage will be boosted to 30%, etc. until he dies. He does not have many mechanics, but the ones that he does have are very important. Hurtful Strike is an attack that deals massive damage to the target which has the second most amount of threat. The tank is generally the highest, so you need a secondary tank to generate threat as well to make sure that they are hit by this attack. Reverberation is an occasional raid-wide silence that lasts for 4 seconds. This is bad because the healers can't heal during those 4 seconds. However, the biggest mechanic is Shatter, and the entire fight revolves around this. Every so often, everyone in the room will get thrown in a random direction. When they land, they get a debuff that reduces their movement speed by 20% every second for 5 seconds. After those 5 seconds, you will be immobilized and turn into stone. You will also gain the Shatter debuff. The Shatter debuff does one thing. It makes you explode. The closer you are to other players, the more damage you will deal to them when you explode. If you're far away from other players, you're totally fine. You'll take very little damage. If you're standing right next to someone, both you and they will die. The objective of this fight is to mitigate this debuff as much as possible by making sure your raid group spreads out properly after being thrown in a random direction. That is the entire fight. Much simpler, right? This fight is all about perfecting a certain mechanic over and over and general raid maintenance. Everyone needs to be perfect. If too many people die, the boss will get too strong, and you'll all die. Those are two very different boss encounters. Now, will raiding in Destiny be like this? I don't know. I hope so, but I don't know. Only Bungie knows the complexity and difficulty of these encounters. They've only said a couple of things about raids. That it took them 45 minutes to crack the entrance of a raid, and that raids have puzzles. In the latest weekly update, in response to a question that claimed raids are 4 or more hours long, Deej said to lean on the or more side of that statement, which is encouraging for people like me who want difficult content. So while we have no idea what Destiny raids are like, I do have an idea of how they could be approached. I'll expand on that later in the video. We do have a couple of things we can compare to: Borderlands 2 and Defiance. Borderlands 2 had raid bosses, but they did not have much complexity. There's a big boss, they do a couple of moves, and you just need to kill it. There are no tanks, no healers, just DPS. There weren't any mechanics you had to deal with. Defiance looks to be more of the same. There might be more people, but from what I've researched, it looks like a lot of the same thing. Here's a boss, shoot it, run away. The more I used to think about it, the more I became discouraged because I didn't really know how much Bungie could make raids like MMORPGs can make raids because of 1, the lack of a holy trinity, and 2, it's in first person for the most part, so seeing environmental effects would be very difficult compared to a third person MMO, which most, if not all, are, where you get a nice aerial view of what you are doing. We have this total lack of the holy trinity in FPS encounters, and as much as I've heard in the past that the Holy Trinity needs to be abolished to make MMOs more interesting, I really don't see how the removal would make anything better, and in fact I think it makes it slightly worse. Guild Wars 2 got rid of the Holy Trinity, and from what I've heard of ex-WoW players who played Guild Wars 2, they didn't enjoy it too much because the dungeons were more just about demolishing everything in your path. There was no strategy. You didn't have to worry about tanking or healing. It seems like, to me, that without those roles, everything just turns into a dungeon crawler, and while I like Diablo 3, if I wanted to go play Diablo 3, I'd go play Diablo 3. I play an MMO because I want that specific experience. However, I don't have any first-hand experience with Guild Wars 2, so if anyone does have experience with both endgame Guild Wars 2 and endgame World of Warcraft, please let us know in the comments what it's really like not having the Holy Trinity in a dungeon group and how it compares to World of Warcraft. That would be greatly appreciated. So why does the Holy Trinity concept even exist in the first place? How did it come to be? It partly has to do with aggro mechanics. The question of AI in an MMO is, who do I attack? With the concept of aggro, people can learn enemy behavior. Naturally, it would be smart to make sure the guy who can take a beating is the primary target of any enemies. If you remove aggro, you have a new fundamental problem of AI. This removal is fine, but it introduces a whole other set of issues that you need to make sure you have completely locked down, otherwise the game completely falls apart. A very simple and broad solution is to get rid of the tank, increase player HP, slightly decrease boss damage and enemy damage so that healers have the ability to react, and have aggro slightly more random. However, taking out the threat table is also a difficult challenge, because you remove the tension of fighting while also removing an expected path to success. Control the boss, and you will win the encounter. So now we come to the topic of raiding in Destiny. How can Bungie give us a solid raiding experience ripe with strategy and teamwork, despite the lack of a defined holy trinity and to a lesser extent, third-person aerial views? Well, before I get to a solution, I'd like to avoid a potential problem. I think it would be a cop-out to have raid content be difficult in a similar vein that most FPS campaigns are difficult. You have less HP, smarter AI, things deal more damage to you, you have to be more careful, etc. Some raids have hard modes and have those kinds of things to augment the challenge. If you want to go into hard modes, should Destiny ever get hard modes, where enemies deal more damage or have more HP, that's fine. But the initial challenge should revolve around complex mechanics, puzzle solving, and teamwork. That's what makes a raid, but more importantly, that's what makes a raid fun. Like I said earlier, in the weekly update, Deej said to lean on the side of or more in reference to the duration of raids being 4 or more hours, which is awesome. These are really looking to be difficult, but I'm hoping it's the kind of difficult that rewards teamwork and not chaos. So, how can Bungie deliver that solid MMO RPG-like raiding experience despite the lack of a holy trinity? Well, they need to rely more on the teamwork mechanics rather than the holy trinity role mechanics. So here are some examples. Hagen the Unclean from World of Warcraft's Naxxramas. A simple fight where the boss must be kited back and forth between 4 sections of floor. Everyone starts on section 4. Sections 1, 2, 3 explode, instantly killing anyone standing on them. After the explosion, everyone moves to section 3. 15 seconds later, platforms 1, 2, and 4 explode. Move to section 2, etc. After about 2 minutes, the boss will teleport to a platform and the raid itself has to move back and forth between the platforms, but only have 3 to 4 seconds between explosions. That's the whole fight. Something like that, something that is teamwork based and not role based in Destiny, is totally doable. It's not really possible to be carried through that content either. Everyone would have to pull their own weight. Role-based mechanics sometimes can hide who is slacking, who is falling behind, and who is not pulling their weight. Before damage meters were mainstream in MMOs, as far as you were concerned, if you were killing bosses, you were doing it right, but you wouldn't know who was slacking or who wasn't good. With teamwork mechanics, the people who aren't pulling their weight or are messing up are in plain sight. However, this is a bit of a different discussion. Here's another example. Thaddeus, also of World of Warcraft's Naxxramas. There is a very simple concept behind this boss. Every so often, every player is either given a positive or negative charge buff. All of those with a positive charge must group up together, and all the negatives must group up together. If there's a positive in the negative group or vice versa, that person dies. That's it. But how do you deal with aggro in Destiny? Who would Thaddeus attack if he was in Destiny? What could players do to prevent that damage? Just run away? Kiting specific things in specific encounters can add an extra element of raid control into a fight. Having to do it every fight as a core mechanic is not fun. Players can't be healed. There are no healers. We don't know how often people will be able to be resurrected in a raid. What if you're unable to be rezzed? These are all fundamental questions that we'll need to see answered before coming to any sort of conclusion on raiding in Destiny. In the comments, I'd like to hear your opinions on raiding. If you've never done a raid before, are you interested now? If you're an experienced raider, what do you think needs to happen to make raiding enjoyable in Destiny? Now I realize there might be a ton of unanswered questions right now from you guys. I definitely did not go over everything I wanted to because this video would have been an hour long if I went over everything that I wanted to. If you have any questions at all, drop them in the comments, and if there are enough questions, I will make a follow-up to this video which will answer your questions on rating. Please keep any questions related to rating only in the comments. As usual, you can find me on Twitter at Datto's Destiny, Facebook is Datto Does Destiny, and a positive rating is always appreciated if you enjoyed the video. That is going to do it for me for this video. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.